I work in a strange church. There are strange rules to follow. I've spent most of my life at St. Vincent's Abbey. It's been here longer than anyone can recall, perched on the hill as if keeping watch over Hollow Creek, Pennsylvania. Some folks call it abandoned, but that's not true. The monks still live here. They wear their robes and recite their prayers, but they're not like the ones you see in movies. No stiff collars or polished crucifixes. Just ordinary men, carrying on as they always have, studying, tending to the locals, and maintaining the Abbey. I'm not one of them. Not officially. I'm Luke, the caretaker, the guy with the wrench in one hand and a mop in the other. If something breaks, I fix it. If something drips, I patch it up. And when something spills, I clean it. The monks treat me well. They're good people. We share meals in the large kitchen, gathered around an old wooden table that's warped with time. Rusty, the cat, always jumps up beside me, swiping at my plate with a determined paw. He's a tough little thing, gray with a ragged ear, but he's mine as much as anyone's. He showed up one day, years ago, and never left, same as me. When visitors stop by, I fade into the background. They ask clueless questions, like why there aren't any stained glass windows. The monks respond with patience, but I keep my mouth shut. I'm not one for small talk. It's the nights that set this place apart. In daylight, St. Vincent's looks like any other aging building, stone walls cracked with time, ivy creeping up the sides, weeds forcing their way between the bricks of the courtyard. It's the kind of place where someone might snap a picture, call it quaint, and move along. But once the sun dips below the horizon and the last car pulls away, everything shifts. The monks retreat to their rooms or the library. They're quiet after dark, they always have been. Tourists don't pick up on that. They don't notice how the monks avoid the Abbey at night unless absolutely necessary. Or the way the heavy door groans when it closes. I don't sleep early, not like the others. My nights stretch on. There's always something to be done, sweeping out dusty corridors, tightening a loose latch, or checking the cramped storeroom beneath the stairs. Most of it's just busy work, small tasks that don't require immediate attention but keep me occupied. It's easier that way. Rusty follows me sometimes, his tail twitching, his sharp eyes flitting toward every shifting shadow. When he stops and stares too long at something, I don't let my gaze linger. Not at night. The Abbey has its own sounds. Not the usual creaks and groans of an ancient structure, but something softer. Faint tapping, like fingertips drumming lightly on wood. Soft clicks, almost like nails scraping against stone. The noises never come from the same place twice. I've learned not to chase them. There are parts of the Abbey I avoid once the sun is down, unless I have no choice. The crypt beneath the chapel, for one. Its door is thick, reinforced wood with iron hinges, and it locks from the outside. During the day, I'll go down if necessary. The old boiler has a mind of its own, and sometimes Rusty gets it in his head that the crypt is a prime hunting ground. But once night falls, the door stays shut. There's another place, too, the hallway in the old rectory. It's nothing remarkable, just a row of unused rooms filled with storage. But after sunset, it feels wrong. Like the space stretches farther than it should. I stick to my routine. Sweep the nave. Check the windows. Make sure the lanterns by the doors stay lit, even though no one really needs them. It's just what's done. Sometimes, while working, I hear footsteps that aren't mine. Like bare feet whispering across cold stone. I've stopped trying to track them down. They never lead anywhere. The monks don't talk about the nights, but they don't need to. They understand what lingers here, same as I do. That's why they lock their doors after dusk and stay in the newer part of the Abbey, where the sacred seals remain strongest. They pray, they chant, and they trust me to handle everything else. I know better than to ask them for explanations. They've been here long enough to know what walks these halls, but they choose not to dwell on it. That part falls to me. This place isn't welcoming, but it isn't malicious either. It's just old. Older than the monks, maybe even older than the Abbey itself. Once darkness falls, the hill turns pitch black. You can't even see your own hand in front of your face, let alone the winding gravel driveway that leads down to the road. The monks call me Luke, but that's not really who I am. Not at night. When the lanterns burn low and the Abbey feels like it's breathing, I have another duty. That's when I become a guardian of St. Vincent's. Over the years, people have called me plenty of things: janitor, handyman, caretaker. Some assume I'm a monk, which never fails to amuse me. I'm none of those things. Guardian isn't quite right either, but it's close enough. The real name for what I'm has been lost to time. It was written in books that crumbled away long before I was born. But when I think about my role, about what my father did, and his father before him, that's the word that makes the most sense. When I was a kid, I loved those old tales. Farm boys stumbling across ancient swords, being trained by wise old mentors, learning to fight, becoming heroes. They'd slay a dragon or rescue a kingdom, then ride off into the horizon with a princess clinging to their back. They were fearless men, driven by a purpose. They had a cause, something worth sacrificing for. That's not quite my story. I've never defended a kingdom, never slain a dragon. In fact, I've never left this hill for more than a day at a time. My armor consists of worn-out boots and a coat that reeks of mothballs. My weapon? A hammer, or occasionally, a sack of salt. And the people under my protection aren't princesses locked in towers. No, I look after old men in robes. It's not the stuff of folklore, but then again, neither am I. I've had this limp since I was 14. It's not debilitating, just enough to make my stride uneven and remind me when a storm's coming, but it's there. It happened the way most injuries do, quick and careless. A kid from Hollow Creek had fallen into the river just beyond the old mill. He was younger than me, maybe 8 or 9, and by the time I heard the shouting, the current had already taken hold. I didn't hesitate, I just ran. The water was high from that week's rain, and as soon as I stepped in, I could feel it pulling at me. I remember his arms flailing, the panic in his eyes when I caught him by the collar and dragged him toward the bank. We made it out, but not before the river twisted my ankle against a rock. I knew something was wrong the moment I tried to stand. The sharp pain made my vision blur, but the kid was coughing up water, and all I cared about was getting him home. I walked him back to his parents, my arm draped over his shoulder, trying not to let him see how much it hurt. By the time I returned to St. Vincent's Abbey, my ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, and I could barely pull my boot off. It would have healed fine if I'd stayed off it like I was supposed to, but I didn't. You don't have time to sit around here. There's always work to be done, and at 14, I was too stubborn to be still. So I kept working, limping through the Abbey with a mop in one hand and my weight on the other leg. By the time the pain faded, the damage had been done. It slows me down, but I've learned to live with it. You adapt. I know which tasks I can handle and which require more time. And when something has to be done quickly, well, I've learned to be strategic about how I move. I don't regret it. That kid is alive, and that matters more than having a perfect ankle. Now, about the Abbey. It isn't ordinary. Neither is Hollow Creek, if I'm honest. It looks normal enough: rows of houses, a quiet main street, a bakery that smells like cinnamon rolls every morning. People go about their lives like anywhere else. But there are things they don't notice, things beyond explanation. When the town goes to sleep, that's when my real work begins. I start at the chapel. It's hardly a chapel, really, just the oldest part of St. Vincent's Abbey, with a towering ceiling and a large wooden cross hanging at the far end. The floor is uneven, the stones smoothed by centuries of footsteps. Every night, I kneel in the same place, third pew from the front. I don't pray for much. Never have. Just one thing, over and over. Wisdom. I don't ask for strength, protection, or for life to get easier. Those things aren't promised to me, and I don't need them. Wisdom is enough. When I finish, I rise and brush the dust from my knees. The monks keep the place tidy, but the ancient stone always leaves a mark. Then, I begin my rounds. The Abbey is held together by rules, small rituals that keep things in balance. Most aren't required nightly, some only matter when something is wrong, but there are a few I follow without fail. The first stop is always the windows. Each sill has a thin line of salt across it. Not much, just enough to keep things from crossing over. I run my hand along the salt, checking for disturbances. If any part is out of place, I sprinkle more from the pouch I carry. Next, I head to the kitchen. It's a warm, inviting space with a massive stone hearth and pots hanging from ceiling hooks. I check the bundle of mint leaves on the counter. There's always a fresh bunch tied with twine. The monks know why they're there. They understand the importance of my work, just as I respect theirs, even if they'd rather not discuss it. The mint is essential. We place it under our pillows to ward off nightmares. And in a place like this, that's not a trivial thing. I open the cupboard and ensure a fresh bundle is ready to replace the old one when needed. I've been growing mint in the small garden behind the Abbey for years. It's surprisingly easy to cultivate. It's always there when I need it. The next stop is the crypt door. I keep onions hanging above it, bound together in pairs with thick string. Most of the time, they just hang there, drying out and collecting dust. Once a month, I take them down and replace them with fresh ones. You can't handle them with bare hands, though. That's crucial. Onions absorb hexes like a sponge soaking up water. If you touch one that's been hanging too long, you may as well be wringing that hex directly onto yourself. The back entrances get onions too, one above the monastery garden's door, another over the small side gate. Anywhere someone, or something, might try to sneak in. Next come the copper spoons. There's a drawer full of them in the kitchen, tucked away so the monks won't grab them by accident. They know their significance and wouldn't use them for anything else. I take each spoon and polish it until it gleams. It's a tedious task, but it has to be done. Copper spoons help counter minor curses. Eat with one, and whatever enchantment has settled on you in the past day or so just fades. It's not a perfect solution, but it helps. The final thing I check is the bag of mustard seeds. I keep it secured in the storeroom under the stairs, bound shut with a strip of leather. Mustard seeds serve one specific purpose: keeping swamp creatures at bay. Scatter a handful at the edge of a marsh, and they won't cross. Every rule has a reason, whether I use it every night or only when the need arises. When all that's done, I return to the nave and sit for a while. Sometimes, Rusty climbs into my lap, purring softly. Other times, he stays nearby, those sharp green eyes of his watching everything. The Abbey is silent by then. So I sit, and I wait. I was seated in the nave, running my fingers through Rusty's fur, when I heard slow, deliberate footsteps behind me. I turned slightly, catching the glow of an oil lamp moving closer. Father Michael came into view, holding the lamp in one hand and resting on his walking stick with the other. He's one of the oldest monks here, but he carries himself like a man with work left to do. His joints may slow him down, but his mind is sharp as ever. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" I asked. "Shouldn't you be working?" he countered. "I am working, just taking a moment," I said, lifting the rag I'd used to polish the copper spoons. Father Michael chuckled as he shuffled over to a nearby bench. He set the lamp down on the table and eased onto the seat with a quiet grunt. Rusty flicked his ear at the sound but stayed curled in my lap. "You've been keeping up with the sacred seals?" Father Michael asked. I nodded. "Salt's in place. Onions are fresh. Mint's fully stocked. Everything's ready," I said. "Good. With the full moon coming, we'll need every bit of it," he replied. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I scratched behind Rusty's ear, listening to the low hum of his purring. The full moon. Most of the time, my job doesn't involve direct confrontation. The sacred seals, the rituals, the small precautions, normally, they're enough. But nights like the ones ahead, when the moon is high and full, things change. The old legends about full moons? They aren't just stories. Father Michael knew that as well as I did. The full moon is when the line between humans and monsters thins. It's when things that don't belong in this world press against the edges, and the sacred seals that usually hold firm start to strain. "You ready for it?" Father Michael asked after a pause. "Always," I said. He gave me a small smile. He'd seen plenty of full moons in his time to know that no amount of preparation makes them easier. "You don't have to stay up with me," I told him. Father Michael picked up the lamp and cradled it in his lap, his fingers absently tracing the glass. For a long while, neither of us spoke. "Do you ever get tired of this?" he asked. "Tired of what?" I replied. "This life. Staying here, doing what you do. Night after night, year after year." I thought about it for a moment. It wasn't the first time someone had asked me that, though it was the first time Father Michael had. "No, it's not a bad life. Not an easy one, but not bad," I said. Father Michael stood slowly, taking his stick and lamp. He paused, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, somewhere between pride and concern. Then he turned and made his way down the corridor, the flickering light of the lamp shrinking until it disappeared around the corner. Rusty stretched in my lap, then curled back up. I sat there a while longer, staring at the worn stone floor, thinking about Father Michael's words. The full moon was coming, and I was ready. Most of the time, I don't fight. But on nights like those, I do. The days leading up to the full moon passed in a familiar rhythm. I kept myself occupied, checking the sacred seals, refreshing the salt barriers, and replenishing the mint leaves. Everything had to be in place. Nights felt stretched, quieter, like the Abbey itself was holding its breath. By the time the moon finally climbed into the sky, the tension wasn't just in my mind, it was in the air, thick and heavy. The monks were gathered in the chapel that night, encircling the altar with clasped hands and bowed heads. Their murmured chants, low and rhythmic, echoed softly through the stone walls. They always prayed when the full moon rose, their way of reinforcing the sacred seals for as long as possible. It wasn't just a matter of faith, it worked. At least, for a while. I never joined them. I never do. Instead, I stood in the library, the dim glow of a single lantern casting long shadows over the table. My Colt peacemaker rested in front of me. To the untrained eye, it wasn't much, an old revolver, its wooden grip worn smooth by years of handling. But the details told another story. A snapdragon flower was etched into one side of the barrel, delicate but distinct, with a cross carved into the other. Symbols of protection. Symbols of death. The gun had been in the Abbey for as long as anyone could remember, passed down through generations for one singular purpose, eliminating what the sacred seals could not contain. I flipped open the cylinder, counting the rounds inside. 3. That was all we had left. 3 chances. If I missed, there wouldn't be another. I exhaled deeply, rolling my bad ankle instinctively. It had been stiff all day, the familiar ache warning me of what was to come. The limp had been with me for so long that I barely noticed it most of the time, but nights like this? Nights where speed was survival. It was impossible to ignore. I slid the Colt peacemaker into the holster strapped at my side and picked up the lantern. Dear friends, please subscribe to the channel, it is very important for its development. The full moon was cresting the horizon as I stepped into the monastery garden, bathing everything in a ghostly glow. The air carried a sharper edge than the night before, and the grass beneath my boots was damp with dew. The sacred seals were still intact, I could sense their hum of protection draped over the Abbey like an invisible shield. I made my way around the perimeter of the garden, scanning the salt lines that traced the edges of the earth. At first glance, they looked undisturbed, but something felt off. The monastery garden had always been the weakest link, shifting earth over time had left small fractures in the protection, tiny places where the sacred seals didn't hold as tightly as they should. And then I saw it. The salt lines had been broken, scattered as though something heavy had trampled them. The mint plants, ones I had tended for years, were flattened, their leaves torn and crushed into the dirt. Deep claw marks gouged the soil near the garden's border, long and uneven, as if something had been testing the defenses. There was a breach. I moved in closer, lifting the lantern. The light caught movement in the distance. The creature stepped forward. It was immense, dwarfing any beast I had ever seen. Its fur was thick, tangled, clinging to its frame in grimy clumps like it had clawed its way out of the grave. The sacred seals were still holding, but only just. I could feel the barrier separating us, the invisible force keeping it at bay. But it was weakening. I watched the creature tense, its claws burrowing into the soil, waiting for the moment the protection would fail completely. Shooting now would be useless. The sacred seals kept things out, but they also dulled whatever power existed within their boundary. A bullet fired within the sacred seals wouldn't carry true, not with enough impact to matter. I had learned that the hard way. Years ago. I reached for my Colt Peacemaker, my fingers tightening around the smooth grip as I drew it from the holster. My eyes never left the beast as I backed away toward the garden's edge. Fear wasn't the right word. I had faced full moons before. I knew what to expect. But there was an edge of unease curling in my gut. I couldn't take this thing head on. That much was clear. It was quicker, stronger, and infinitely more brutal than I would ever be. But that didn't matter. I had never survived full moons by brute force alone. I didn't need to overpower it, I needed to outthink it. Keeping my movements deliberate, I backed into the nave, Colt Peacemaker raised, my breath steady. The creature lingered at the threshold of the garden, its claws flexing against the earth, those burning yellow eyes fixed on me. It hadn't moved yet, but the sacred seals were unraveling, and when they failed, it would come for me. The nave was my best option. The pews were old, solid, and I shoved a few into position as fast as I could. By the time I was done, my muscles burned, and my breathing was heavier than I liked. I crouched behind the last pew, Colt Peacemaker at the ready, and waited. The first thing I heard was the scrape of claws against stone. Then, the creature emerged through the doorway, its hulking form lowering as it sniffed the air. It moved with slow, deliberate intent, but I wasn't about to wait. The Colt Peacemaker jolted in my grasp as I pulled the trigger, the gunshot echoing through the nave. The bullet struck the stone wall behind the beast, sending shards of rock scattering. I muttered a curse under my breath as the creature flinched, then turned its gaze toward me. If it had been watching before, now it was actively hunting. It prowled forward, stepping over the first pew effortlessly, its claws raking across the aged wood as it climbed. The atmosphere in the room seemed to grow heavier under its presence. Then, without warning, Rusty darted from the shadows. The cat sprang onto the beast, claws bared, sinking his teeth deep into the thick fur of its leg. A guttural snarl rumbled from the creature as it thrashed violently, sending Rusty hurtling into a pew. Instinct took over, I fired again. The second shot hit its shoulder, the silver searing into its flesh, but it wasn't enough. The beast roared in pain, twisting as it turned to fully face me. Rusty landed hard but pushed himself back up, his torn ear twitching as he let out a sharp yowl. He'd been through worse, he wasn't backing down. "Rusty, stay put," I warned. He ignored me, as always. The creature's focus snapped back to me. One bullet left. My arms held steady, but my breath came in shallow gasps. My thoughts spiraled in every direction until a memory surfaced, clear as day. I was 10, sitting outside the Abbey with my head in my hands, frustrated over spilling a bucket of water in the nave. Father Michael had found me, sat beside me, and let the silence stretch before speaking. When things feel overwhelming, when they're too big to handle, just breathe. One breath at a time, and the rest will follow, he had said. I had looked at him, confused. "That's it?" I'd asked. "That's it. Just breathe." Now, with the Colt Peacemaker in hand and the beast mere feet away, his words rang in my mind. So I breathed. Steady, even inhales as I stepped backward, each movement controlled. I aligned the shot, my finger brushing the trigger. The weight of the Colt felt different now, lighter, like an extension of myself. Then I waited. The beast lunged, clearing the final pew, jaws wide, so close I could feel the force of its movement against my skin. I fired. The gun roared, the silver bullet piercing straight into its chest. For a fleeting moment, the beast hung in midair, a chilling howl ripping from its throat. Then, it collapsed, body convulsing as the silver consumed it. Bit by bit, its form crumbled, fur and flesh disintegrating into ash, leaving nothing behind, not even a mark on the floor. It was gone. I lowered the Colt Peacemaker. My arms throbbed, and my legs felt leaden, but I steadied myself against a pew. Then it hit me, Rusty. Pushing off the wood, I limped toward where he had been thrown. The gun dangled loosely in my grasp as my eyes searched the room. "Rusty?" I called. It didn't take long. He was crouched by the far pew, low but unscathed. His sharp green eyes met mine, unwavering, and I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He stretched lazily, shook himself off, and padded toward me as if nothing had happened. "You are unbelievably lucky." "A werewolf? Really? You thought you could take on a werewolf?" I crouched beside him. He nudged his head against my hand, purring as I scratched behind his ears. His torn ear flicked as if to say, "I almost got him, though." I sighed, letting my shoulders relax for the first time all night. For a long while, silence settled over the nave. The air felt still, calm once more. I remained there, sitting on the cold stone floor with Rusty curled in my lap, until I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. The monks were coming from the chapel, their hushed voices drifting into the nave. Father Michael led the way, his walking stick tapping softly against the stone floor. When they caught sight of me, pale and still clutching the Colt Peacemaker, their expressions softened. Father Michael knelt beside me, his joints popping audibly, and examined me with those sharp, knowing eyes. "You made it," he murmured. "Always," I replied. The others drew in closer, two of them lending a hand to help me to my feet. By the time we reached the kitchen, the lanterns there were still glowing dimly, casting a warm light over the space. Rusty had already padded in ahead of us, leaping onto the counter and curling up as if he hadn't just been flung halfway across the nave. I reached out and scratched the top of his head. Father Michael gave a nod to one of the monks, who immediately moved to heat water on the old iron stove. The rest worked in quiet efficiency, gathering the tea leaves, mint, the good kind I always kept for nights like this. It was always mint after a full moon. The Colt Peacemaker remained on the table before me. I gazed at it for a while, letting my eyes follow the intricate etching of the snapdragon flower. I wasted all 3 bullets. Should have been 1, maybe 2, I admitted at last. Father Michael's gaze flicked to the gun, then back to me. Tilting his head slightly, he offered a small, knowing smile. "You didn't waste them, Luke. You used them." "Doesn't feel that way," I muttered. "Bullets are meant to be spent. Don't dwell on the numbers. I'll send word to the Abbey in the morning for more." I blinked, momentarily caught off guard, then let out a short laugh. "That simple, huh?" Father Michael smirked. "You'd be surprised what a well-crafted letter can accomplish." One of the monks handed me a steaming mug, and the scent of mint filled the air. Wrapping my hands around the cup, I took a careful sip. It was strong and fresh, the kind of drink that made it feel like you could breathe properly again. Rusty stretched on the counter, letting out a slow yawn. Things always settle back into routine eventually. That's just the way it is here. St. Vincent's Abbey endures, the monks carry on their prayers, and I handle the work that needs doing. There's a kind of solace in it, even if it isn't exactly grand. The morning after a full moon, I found myself back in the monastery garden. The salt lines needed refreshing, and the mint plants were in disarray, crushed and torn from the night's struggle. I crouched to clear out the broken stems, digging fresh rows into the soil. Rusty perched on the stone wall nearby, watching me, his torn ear flicking every so often. After a full moon, the days blur together. I check the sacred seals, mend what's broken, and prepare for the inevitable next time. There's always a next time. I'm not as young as I once was, and I feel it more with each passing year, the stiffness in my knees as I climb the stairs, the dull ache in my ankle when the weather shifts. Nights like last night take more out of me than they used to, and the mornings don't grant me the same energy they once did. Someday, I'll have to find someone younger to take my place. But not yet. For now, I'm still here, and there's work to be done. Which part of St. Vincent's Abbey intrigued you the most? The eerie crypt, the unsettling hallway in the old rectory, or the garden where the protective barriers were broken? Write your impressions in the comments and don't forget to subscribe.